Welcome to Maddie's Monthly Foster Connection, a monthly webcast where we learn about topics of interest to those of us who are interested in starting or expanding foster programs. Our guest today is Dr. Chumkee Aziz. Dr. Aziz is a first-generation Bangladeshi American and native Houstonian. She received her DVM degree from Tufts Vet School in 2012. She then completed an internship with ASPCA in New York City in 2013 and a shelter medicine residency at the UC Davis Koret Shelter Medicine Program in 2016. After her residency, she worked for the Austin Humane Society and the ASPCA before returning to work with UC Davis KSMP as shelter medicine consultant. She's board certified in shelter medicine practice through the American Board of Veterinary Practitioners, and she serves on their Shelter Medicine Specialty College. She also served on the Association of Shelter Veterinarians Board from 2017 through 2022. She has helped author the ASB Guidelines of Standards of Care in Animal Shelters, the AAHA Canine Vaccination Guidelines, and publications on shelter feline housing and well-being. Her professional interests include supporting shelters in helping their communities and managing infectious disease outbreaks. She volunteers with Houston Street Dog Coalition and chapter and supports underserved Houston-based students who want to obtain post-secondary education training. She enjoys birding and loves movies. All right, welcome, Dr. Aziz.
Hey, Kelly, thank you for the intro. And thank you to Maddie's Fund for having me today. I am really excited to be here because sanitation is sometimes not the most glamorous topic, but one of the most important topics, especially in foster care. So I appreciate being here, and I hope today's presentation is useful in the most practical ways. Please put your questions into the Q&A, and if we don't get to them, I will try to make sure I get to them in the Maddie's Pet Forum. But let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go through a few slides, and then we're going to go through a case study to try to do some kind of practical insight into how to manage ringworm in the foster home. All right. How does that look?
Great. Perfect.
All right. Foster home sanitation tips. Let's get started. Our primary themes for today are going to be that sanitation is always a two-step process. We're going to talk about that a little more in depth. It's always cleaning and disinfecting. Y'all know this because many of you are foster caregivers out there who've probably been in the game for a long time. And you know that one of the most important aspects of getting animals into foster care is, yes, keeping them healthy and safe medically, but also trying to maintain their behavioral well-being and their mental health. That is such a critical component of foster care and why foster care is invaluable in sheltering. And then what we'll go through is some of the most important parts of foster home sanitation, the practicalities, where to clean, how often to clean. So some of the questions that might come up that you kind of think, okay, what do I do for ringworm versus what do I do for parvo versus what do I do if everyone's just clean and healthy, or what do I do for coccidia? So we'll go through a few different discussion points there. Let's start off first, though, with the primary infectious diseases we often see in the shelter. And a lot of the times we can see in foster care, sometimes purposefully, sometimes we it's wonderful if we can get a mildly affected animal with parvo or panleuk into a foster home where they can be cared for with just so much more TLC than we might be able to provide in a busy shelter. So sometimes we purposefully will put some of these medical animals out in foster homes with y'all, but sometimes they might inadvertently, without us knowing, we might send these animals to foster care and they were already harboring something like ringworm or panleukopenia or parvovirus, and they end up breaking with those diseases in your home. So I won't belabor this. And also the slides will always be available for sharing afterwards. But I did want to share some of the basics around the most common infectious diseases. So Y'all, I'm sure, are familiar with parvo and panleuk, GI signs that can become deadly if we don't provide treatment and supportive care as soon as possible for these animals. Most importantly, it's shed and transmitted through the fecal oral route. So through an animal's waste products, if another animal, let's say, picks that up on its paw and then grooms itself and licks its paw. And then most importantly, we'll talk about this too, or just as importantly rather, fomite transmission, which is you and I are the big culprits usually of fomites, but we'll talk about that more. Parvo and panleuk, particularly concerning because it's very, very hardy in the environment and on surfaces. So that's the trickiest part with parvo and panleuk. And then always remember too, that something like parvo and panleuk, your animal might be shedding parvo and panleuk before it becomes clinically symptomatic. So that's a big reason why we always talk about try to keep foster kittens and puppies in areas that can be easily disinfected, because we don't ever know when an animal might start shedding these viral infections, which can become very hardy in the environment. Calicivirus, I suspect folks know about this one because it's part of the upper respiratory infection complex for kitties, and you've all seen it, the symptoms of URI. It's going to be transmitted through pretty close cat-to-cat contact, or again, fomites. Calici is another one of these viruses, though, that is very durable in the environment, and it can also shed before an animal becomes symptomatic. And then we know this too, just like herpes virus, calicivirus can be it can be worsened with stress-related situations. So again, foster care is so valuable for helping to reduce stress of these animals and try to get them to overcome URI infections faster than they might in the shelter. Ringworm, I suspect everyone's dealt with ringworm here. We'll talk about that because our case study will go over ringworm. And really important, it is durable in the environment, but it turns out I'm not going to say it's easy to clean, but it's a lot easier than we once thought, which is really good news. And then most importantly, ringworm can be transmitted from cat to human, typically not a robustly healthy human, but sometimes younger children or maybe an immunocompromised family member, so we want to be safe there. And then I share coccidia too, because y'all have probably all dealt with coccidia. It's such a pain, and it can be really scary because it can result in death in some of our small kittens and poor doers. Also very durable in the environment. Okay. So I share a little bit about infectious diseases and how they're transmitted, because that of course leads us logically to how do we make sure we set up our home environment so that they are as easy to clean as possible, right? What our goal is that you are able to foster kittens and dogs and puppies and cats for shelters numerous times over in an ideal world, right? So we want to make sure that parvo, panleuk, calici, coccidia, ringworm, all of those things are maintained in a way that can be easily disinfected and decontaminated. So I share two different photos here. Y'all might have similar setups in your own home. One is, maybe in actually the space of a living room where they've set up kind of a X-Pen type spot with products that can either be readily cleaned. If not cleaned, they might have to be discarded. But something like that in a kind of a area without a lot of human traffic. And then probably a lot of us have used our bathrooms where you can set up spaces that are just completely disinfectable. So a lot of these, or almost all of this in here, could be laundered, decontaminated, disinfected, which is so helpful. I want to share too a quick side note. This is something that our UC Davis program developed for actually the wildfires in Maui for cats that were having to be housed for a few weeks at a time because of the wildfire disaster. And a lot of pop-up housing was needed, but we needed humane housing for that. And so what one of our colleagues, Dr. Danae Wagner, invented, so to speak, is she put together two pop-up crates, basically, combined them. There's a great video on the website if you check it out. Combine them literally with zip ties and using some instruments and equipment. And it creates a big enough space where you could maintain an animal, not for prolonged periods of time, but as needed, with a space for a shelf, a space where you can put cardboard in between the two crates so you can almost like clean animals through spot cleaning by shifting the animal over from one crate to the other. So mimicking what could be a really helpful temporary solution for maintaining animals who might need temporary housing or might need infectious disease housing. Okay. So set up for easy sanitation. These are all things that are probably in the back of our mind, if not in the top of mind, as foster homes and caregivers. And a lot of this probably comes to you intuitively. But let's say we're working with new foster caregivers. Let's say that you're helping to train a new foster caregiver or a new home, or someone says, you know, I have an apartment or I have a smaller space. I don't have a bigger home. What does this look like? And so these are the primary considerations we think of, just kind of the basics, right? So a small area that's readily, that you can readily disinfect and contain, basically. Make sure it's pet proof, so no electrical wires that are hanging out, things like that. An area with low human traffic, and that's for stress, but also fomite transmission, which we'll talk about in a moment. Avoid grass for puppies and dogs, especially if someone is, and this primarily applies to puppies who are sick. So we don't want to get parvo in our yards if we can help it. So there are ways to mitigate that, primarily picking up the poop as quickly as possible and discarding it. But if we have a sick puppy, we want to avoid grass when we can. Minimal furniture and a carpet, again, things that are easy to disinfect, and furniture and carpet, curtains, much harder to disinfect than a solid surface, right? Easy to sanitize areas. When we can, isolate from other pets, especially for the first few weeks of foster care. I know that it's not always possible or practical, but especially while we're watching our foster animals to make sure they don't break with anything, we want to keep them isolated from other pets for a little bit. Have dedicated supplies so you're not running around, but also, again, if you end up with parvo or panleuk or ringworm, you have supplies for your foster area versus the rest of your home, so there's no cross-contamination. And then declutter. Declutter is just, I think, always something I am working towards, but especially for something like ringworm, where we know that ringworm spores can get on a lot of things. We want to keep the area decluttered as much as possible. And then good ventilation, good airflow for good upper respiratory health, and also for just good air quality. All right. So all of those things, those components of easy setup are important for a lot of reasons, but one of the big reasons is to prevent fomite transmission. And y'all have probably heard about this, or you might be training someone on this, but fomite transmission is literally any object, non-living object, that can carry an infectious particle on its surface and transmit it accidentally to another animal or a person. In the shelter setting, we, the workers, the volunteers, the caregivers in the shelter setting, we are the biggest source of fomites because we are handling so many animals per day through intake, through adoptions and surgery, whatever that is. We are actually the biggest carriers of fomites. So we have to have fomite transmission top of mind in our head all the time to prevent us from accidentally spreading something that we didn't mean to. The same goes in foster care, that anything can be a fomite, including people, water dishes, food bowls, litter trays, whatever that looks like. So important to keep those things easily cleanable. And then, of course, when we think about humans, one of the primary sources of fomite transmission our hands, right? We're picking up animals, we're petting animals, we're trying to give them behavioral enrichment, TLC. So there's a lot of course, what we're doing with our hands. And so important to remember that, yes, we want to keep all parts of our body safe and protected from accidental fomite transmission, but our hands are probably the biggest source, right? So using hand sanitizer when your hands are clean, and remembering that it'll be helpful for a lot of diseases, but it's not effective for parvo, panleuk, or calicivirus, those really hardy viruses, and it's not effective for ringworm. Still really valuable to use because it is effective otherwise on other pathogens. Gloves. Y'all know this when you're handling infectious animals. If you're handling bodily fluids, use gloves whenever you can. They're the most effective at preventing fomite transmission, disease transmission. And hand washing. Hand washing is still very effective if we do it correctly. Y'all have all seen the posters for that. At least 20 seconds of good scrubbing and rubbing. And again, anytime you come into contact with bodily fluids, make sure your hands are washed, especially before using sanitizer. And then the drying part is just as important as the washing part. So just some of the practicalities around fomite transmission and how to prevent that. And then you probably have some type of setup in your foster caregiving area that is maybe a cart like one of the photos here, or a shelf where you have supplies handy and ready to go. I've just included a list of common supplies you probably want to keep at your disposal. There's probably a lot more than this that you have, but I think these are the basics that I could think of, so I wanted to just make a quick list. And then let's get into the actual process of sanitation itself. I mentioned this before at the beginning, that sanitation is always a two-step process of cleaning and disinfecting. Cleaning is by far the most important part of sanitation. Cleaning is really getting rid of all of the visible organic debris and litter, feces, urine, trash, whatever that looks like. You're getting rid of that often with just elbow grease or good scrubbing or good cleaning with a rag, whatever that looks like. You need to clean first with some type of detergent. The second part of that is then disinfecting with some type of chemical that helps inactivate any of the remaining microorganisms or pathogens that are there. Disinfecting, of course, has to be done at the right dilution for the right contact time. I'm sure we've all heard of that. We'll talk about it a bit more. But again, always remember that this is a two-step process, even if you're using the same product for both steps. So an example would be Rescue Accelerated Hydrogen Peroxide. If you use that, Rescue is a product that is both a detergent and disinfectant. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you can do effective sanitation, full-blown, complete sanitation, like peace of mind sanitation of parvo or ringworm or panleuk. You can't do that unless you're doing the full two steps. So cleaning to get rid of the debris first, and then using Rescue as your disinfectant as well to get rid of any remaining organisms, microorganisms. We'll talk about this a bit more too as we go through some of the case studies. So it's a two-step process, but really the process is something like this, which y'all are, everyone is familiar with. You've gone through this, right? If we're dealing with something like ringworm or parvo, we want to put on protective clothing. So whether that's some type of disposable smock or some type of dress or outfit or coveralls we use that we know we can launder effectively, we want to use protective clothing when we're handling animals that are sick or infectious. You're going to clean with some type of detergent. It could be the same product as your disinfectant, or it might not be. One example where it's not the same product is bleach, right? For all of us who use bleach, bleach does not have any detergent activity in it. So you have to use some type of detergent. Something like Dawn dish soap will work first before you can effectively apply bleach. So then we disinfect, as we mentioned, rinse with water, and then thoroughly dry. The drying part is just as important as all these other parts because primarily a lot of microorganisms and pathogens can live in moist and moist environments. So we want to make sure we dry all surfaces before we put an animal into it or return an animal into that area. I won't go over this too much in depth, but I did want to share these schematics because they're just the basics of some of the most common products we'll use in sheltering and fostering, and the pros and cons. So you have kind of a quick reference if you ever need it. And you'll notice that I have put the photo of the product itself on kind of a scale. You know, are there more pros than cons, etc. So with bleach, I mentioned that it is one of the big cons is that it has no detergent activity. And so you have to use something as a detergent first before you can ever apply bleach. And bleach itself, if it touches organic debris or matter or urine, feces, whatever that is, it will get inactivated. So it becomes ineffective if it is not applied to a clean surface. So the trickiest thing with bleach is that you have to do a full two-step process of cleaning and disinfection whenever you use bleach. And sometimes it's hard, like if we're in a hurry, did we do that effectively? Do we feel like we have peace of mind? And so I know a lot of folks still use bleach. Of course, it's cheap, it's accessible. We can get it anywhere if we need to run out in the middle of the day and get something. But remember, for something like Parvo, Panluke, Khaleesi, I tend to go use other products like Rescue because they give me better peace of mind. Because I know that something like Rescue is not going to be inactivated if I accidentally didn't thoroughly clean the surface first. So I stick with something that's a little more effective, a more two-in-one product, and I know has really good action even in the face of some organic debris. So I'll talk about that in the next slide, but I wanted to, of course, touch on bleach because it's such a common day product. The other tricky part about bleach, though, is especially if we don't use it at the right dilution, it can be a respiratory irritant. I suspect you've seen animals, especially like kittens, affected by this, but perhaps even yourself, right? And so in the shelter setting, and I would argue as well in the foster setting, we want to typically reserve bleach for laundry. Bleach is still great when used in laundry with detergent. And I would use it probably at a really low concentration, you know, on days I needed it, if with typically healthy-ish animals. But if I'm dealing with something more intense, a little scarier, more durable, Parvo, Panluke, something like that, I'm going to go for a different product. And often I reach for a Rescue accelerated hydrogen peroxide. And again, the reason is because it has that detergent and disinfectant in it, and it can work really well still in the face of organic matter like feces and urine. You don't want to just totally splash your Rescue over feces and think it's going to completely disinfect it. It's not. We still have to do the cleaning process first. But Rescue is definitely going to be more effective than bleach in that case if we didn't thoroughly clean the surface first. Rescue is particularly helpful too because it stays stable for a really long time and it's not toxic. It's basically a charged up version of hydrogen peroxide, so it just kind of eliminates itself into hydrogen and oxygen. But I will say that it's costly, and if you're using the concentrate, you have to use some type of personal protective equipment, so you have to keep yourself safe if you're using the concentrate. And then I'll share just a few more here, products that you might have heard of or you might use in the shelter, or perhaps the shelter gave you to use. Trifectant is another one. It comes in a powder tablet, and it It is similar to rescue in that it has detergent activity and disinfectant. But I would say the biggest challenge with trifectant is that you have to dilute it every 7 days if you're using it. So it just takes a little more manual labor, let's say, to keep up with trifectant, to make sure that the trifectant you're using that's been diluted is truly effective. And then folks have probably heard of products like Parvusol, Kenasol, Odoban, Fantastic, 409. All of these products actually fall into one big category called quaternary ammoniums. They're everywhere. They're at every supermarket. They're everywhere. They are good. They are good for cleaning and disinfecting when you don't have anything too scary, when you don't have parvo or panluke, anything like that. They are good for basic cleaning. They are typically very affordable. They have some action in the face of organic matter, but they are definitely not effective, no matter what concentration, no matter what contact time. They are not effective against parvo, panluke, or calisi. So if we're dealing with any of those viruses, we cannot use quaternary ammonium products and feel safe that we truly disinfected the area. I will talk about it for the use of ringworms because it turns out it is effective against ringworm. We'll speak about that in a little bit. So there is a lot of use and value for quaternary ammonium, but I will say this, the most important component in my mind when you use a quaternary ammonium is to make sure that you've diluted it correctly, that you're not using it directly around animals when animals are being housed in the area, because it can be toxic. It can cause irritation. It can cause oral ulcers that might look like calisi. I'll show you a photo in a minute. So be careful with quaternary ammoniums in that sense. And this is just a chart for you to use if you ever need or want to go back to it. And it's this idea of what product can you use for what scenario. And when I share this chart with shelters, I will often say you can determine what product is most suitable for your shelter based on your staffing number. Do you have tons of time in the morning to clean? Because then you could use something that requires, 2 different products for detergent and disinfectant. Or maybe you're really slammed with time in the morning, which most shelters and homes are, and you need to make sure that you can use something that has a shorter contact time for disinfectant. So I share this here because it can give you an idea of what you can reach for in what type of situation. And one caveat here, I know that natural products, baking soda, vinegar, these are easily accessible. They're typically not harmful for our animals. You just want to make sure that you're using them for cleaning, that they will not be effective for disinfection. So again, if you're dealing with parvo, panluke, calisi, they will not be effective if we're trying to manage those pathogens. Okay. This is a really important slide because we do see this accidentally happen from time to time, right? When we are dealing with disinfectant products, we know that that we need to use them correctly, apply them correctly, and store them correctly. So I like this ASPCA list. There's a link here that has a list of harmful household products to pets. It's just a helpful link you can share with your fosters and foster homes. In general, especially with cats, you want to avoid products like Lysol or Pine Sol. These can be irritants to especially cats. They can cause sneezing, coughing. You'll see sometimes cats get breathing difficulty. So avoid those products around cats directly. Always use products at the right dilution. I mentioned that and I shared some photos here. This is a cat tongue that's been ulcerated due to the use of a quaternary ammonium product that wasn't diluted correctly. And then similarly, this is a dog scrotum that looks pretty upset and inflamed and maybe a little ulcerated, again, because he was lying down on a kennel that had been cleaned and disinfected with an inappropriate dilution of a quaternary ammonium. And then this is, I mean, I have bottles like this at home, but this is what we want to avoid, especially in the foster setting, is we are not sure what this product is anymore, when it was diluted. We don't have any labels on it. So avoid that whenever you can. Keep things current, keep things labeled. And two other things. Avoid spraying directly into the area that a puppy or kitten or cat or dog is in. Typically what we want to do if we have a bottle of disinfectant or cleaner, we want to spray it onto a rag and then use the rag in that area. And it's just, again, the same idea. Try to avoid aerosolizing any disinfectants that could cause respiratory irritation to these animals. And then I typically say this, I know in our households in general, we have tons of different cleaning products, disinfectant products, but when you're working with your foster animals, I suggest limiting how many products you're working with to make sure that you're not mixing anything accidentally. So we never want to mix rescue with bleach. It can result in a noxious gas. We don't want to use that. And the same with quaternary ammonium and bleach. We don't want to mix those two products. And then we don't want to mix, for instance, bleach with the detergent, because the detergent can totally inactivate the bleach. So I try to keep the number of disinfectants in use as minimal as possible in the foster setting. And then how often to clean or sanitize? This is just general kind of rule of thumb is, of course, anything that's a quick mess, vomit, diarrhea, discharge, clean that up quickly. If all of the animals in my house are healthy, I typically sanitize thoroughly at least once a week. I bet a lot of us are sanitizing more often than that, but theoretically, at least once a week. If someone in the household has parvo, panleuk, calisi, you want to sanitize that area, deep, thorough disinfectant once a day at least, right? If it's ringworm, you can clean it up at least once a day and then sanitize the area fully at least twice a week. That's a good rule of thumb. And then, of course, anytime an animal is coming or going, make sure that you have thoroughly sanitized your household in the foster area before and after. And then a flowchart on laundry. In general, this is kind of the rule of thumb with laundry. Shake out feces, try to get rid of debris if you're washing clothes, blankets, beds, whatever that looks like. This is probably the most important step though. Do not overfill the washer. The most important component of doing laundry, and we've probably all experienced this because I know I overfill the washer sometimes, but the most important component is not to overfill the washer so the washer can do its work in agitating the clothing as much as possible. That's what actually helps get the clothes and the materials clean. That's what we want. Typically, we say hot water, and then you can use bleach or color-safe bleach if you need to. Of course, use it in the correct compartments because your washing machine will first use detergent and then use bleach to do the disinfectant, right? It keeps it apart. If you're worried about parvo, panleuk, something like that, and you're determined to launder that piece of clothing or bedding, I typically say you probably want to dispose of that if you're worried about parvo or panleuk. But if you have to launder it, then use something more heavy hitting like rescue. And then, of course, dry thoroughly. So those are some slides, hopefully some of the basics and fundamental ideas of sanitation. And then for the last few minutes, we'll just go over ringworm, a case study with ringworm. I want to share that back in the day, we used to think that ringworm was just, if you got cats with ringworm in your house, the spores were just everywhere and they were multiplying, and that's how spores could spread and infect other animals. What we found over time, though, through a lot of good studies, is that really that's not how animals are getting infected. Primarily, animals are getting infected by direct cat-to-cat transmission or by us accidentally fomite transmission. And so some urban myths here quickly about ringworm, right? It is not like mold. It's not multiplying in the environment. It needs its host and it needs hair to grow in. So it's not just multiplying everywhere in our homes. If you're dealing with something like respiratory disease, it's not going to be ringworm. This type of fungus does not cause respiratory disease, only skin disease. Again, they're not living. And the truth is, whether we want to admit this or not, they're present in a lot of day-to-day environments. If you're going to the gym, if you're going to public pools, there are probably ringworm particles of different species all around us. And for the most part, we're not constantly infected or affected by ringworm. We try to maintain good hygiene and health. And so even though ringworm is pretty abundant in most places, it doesn't cause that many problems if we can keep ourselves and our foster animals healthy and we do appropriate sanitation around it. So I share all of this because I really want to destigmatize the idea that ringworm is incredibly contagious, infectious, that it'll stay in your home forever, and that we really need to, not touch the animals if we're fostering them and they have ringworm. That myth has been busted. We want to make sure that we're providing all of our foster kittens and puppies that have ringworm with good socialization, handling. We want to uphold their behavioral well-being as much as we uphold their medical well-being. Okay, so as I mentioned before, it's always going to be this multi-step process. And with ringworm, it's no different. You're gonna remove all the debris on whatever you're trying to clean. You're gonna get the hairs out, the spores out, shake it out in an outside area, whatever that looks like, directly into the garbage. You're gonna clean the area with some type of detergent. Again, it could be some type of even dish Dawn soap, as long as you follow that up with a disinfectant at the right contact time, at the right dilution. Or it could be something like Rescue, where you're using Rescue for both the cleaning and disinfecting part, which is totally effective. This is where I wanted to mention that a lot of products over the counter, things like Fantastic, Kennel Sol, these products, they are effective against ringworm. We used to think that they weren't, but now we realize that if they have a label against this type of ringworm species that I've mentioned here, trichophyton, if they have a label against that on their product, on their bottle, they are effective when used properly. And really the tip here is the mechanical removal of debris is the most important component. So like get the elbow grease in there. If you just dealt with and helped nurse a litter of ringworm kittens back to health and got them sent out to adoption or back to the shelter for adoption, awesome. What you want to do is first things first, really good elbow grease to do the mechanical cleaning part, and then follow up with pretty much any disinfectant we realize nowadays. Most important component. And then I mentioned this before, with ringworm, we want to typically at least clean up the area once a day, and you can do daily spot cleaning. Spot cleaning is so helpful because it's less stressful for the animal. You're not touching the animals as much and accidentally spreading fomite. It's just quicker, and you can do it with soap or a detergent and less disinfectant that might be irritating. And it's valuable because it's just the quick tidying, pick up, whatever that looks like, and it's totally appropriate to do on a day-to-day basis for ringworm. You can spot clean as much as you want, and then remember, at least twice a week, whatever area your foster kittens or puppies are in, you want to thoroughly sanitize. Laundry, I'm going to go over this. It's a bit different because we have actually research about ringworm from our University of Wisconsin colleagues. And again, separate exposed laundry, ringworm from other laundry, do them separately. Discard organic matter, try to shake it out in a contained area. Again, don't overload the washer. We want maximal agitation. And this is an interesting one. It turns out that using hot water and or bleach doesn't typically, it does not affect our ability to disinfect ringworm on cloth. Again, it turns out what's most important is just not to overload the washer. And sometimes if you feel that you are dealing with contamination in the environment because for some reason you're cleaning, disinfecting a lot, but sometimes you're still getting kittens that just aren't curing from ringworm because maybe there's environmental contamination in your space, then you want to make sure that you're thoroughly laundering everything. So it might be that you don't just need one thorough wash cycle, but you need two of the longest wash cycles. I only go for the second, like really one long cycle should do. If you're worried about contamination, that's when you might need to up your game and start trying other tactics if you're worried about contamination. And then again, dry thoroughly. Floors, right? Because we have our animals on floors. This one's helpful. Spot clean when you can with a Swiffer or vacuum. Don't use a broom because that can just kind of scoot spores over. So use a Swiffer that will use electrostatic mechanisms to pick up the spores and then dispose of those liners. If you accidentally did end up with ringworm in your carpet or your curtains, I understand this can happen. What research has shown is that 2 rounds of carpet shampooing or steam cleaning can typically decontaminate that. If you're worried about a really heavy contamination of ringworm in your carpet, then you could use something like Rescue inside of a carpet shampooer, but just be cautious that there could be some discoloring of your carpet. So that's something to remember. And then this is just the kind of general wrap up of what we want to focus on in our foster home for sanitation. We want to keep a designated space. We want to have it as least cluttered as possible so I can clean as many things as possible and disinfect it. We want to wear our dedicated clothing that we use around foster animals and not around our children or our pets. Whenever possible, use things like plastic toys, especially if we're worried about ringworm or parvo or panloops, because we can throw those away, or with something like ringworm, we can actually truly disinfect those if we need to, as opposed to maybe other types of toys that are really hard to disinfect. Change bedding daily, and that's really just to get rid of that, like the daily load of organic debris that's hanging around, especially with ringworm. Just get rid of that so it doesn't build up in the environment. And then remember, if it can be washed, it can be sanitized. Just don't overfill your washer. If it can't be, and you have any doubt that it can't be, throw it away. And then with ringworm particularly, do that spot cleaning daily, but at least a twice weekly sanitation. So I hope that case study kind of helps you walk through. I suspect like kitten season is here. It's about to get full blown. You probably might be dealing with ringworm kittens. So I hope that ringworm case study could be helpful to you from a practical standpoint. And then I just want to wrap up here with a few resources. I love this chart. It's on ASPCA Pro. It's a really good go-to for what works against what type of disease that we're dealing with. I love that this one. It's really helpful. And I put the website on the side here. If you're using Rescue accelerated hydrogen peroxide, here are the recommended dilutions. I'll share that with y'all too. And then, of course, if you ever want to be in touch, feel free to email me. If you ever have questions or want some support training, I'm always here available via email. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this provided you with some practical tips for sanitation. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aziz. This completely blew my mind. We have we have just a few questions if you want to come back on really quick.
Yes,
and
of course.
you take like 5 minutes and then,
Sure.
okay. One is, are there any methods, like maybe a HEPA air filter machine to help control calicivirus in cafe situations? The rescue cats keep getting it, and they send home the symptomatic ones, but it seems to spread anyway.
Okay, there's a lot going on in this question. Okay. Um, HEPA filters are primarily tested in human medical settings, and they are primarily good for allergen removal and air quality. I cannot speak to their use for disinfecting something like calici or reducing the load of calici, because remember, calici is incredibly hardy in the environment. There are newer products that are being used in human medicine and now finally veterinary medicine, which is incredibly exciting. They are air purifiers and sanitizers. They are like ion charged, where they can stay on the surface for prolonged periods of time, and they can bind disease particles. And we're still waiting for research in the veterinary field about the effectiveness of these products. But I will tell you that I have heard of a few shelters in California where I primarily work that have started using them in their dog housing areas and cat housing areas to try to reduce disease pathogen load. And I'll give you one quick example. For instance, a shelter I was recently speaking with said that they installed a bunch of these air purifier sanitizers in their dog kennel ward, and they feel that canine infectious respiratory disease rates have decreased, even though they don't have the best housing setup. For instance, they have direct cage chain link kennels, so dogs are actually going nose to nose. So dogs with a cough might be going nose to nose, and they feel that these sanitizing purifiers have made a big difference. So I hope that helps.
Yes, absolutely. What is your best recommendation for sanitizing for coccidia? We struggle to find definitive cleaner recommendation other than a very strong ammonia.
I know. I hear you. The most important component of coccidia is clean it up, get rid of it, throw it away in the trash as quickly as possible. And because it's so hardy, these cysts, once they if they're out in the environment for too long, they there are all these technical components to it, but they can encyst themselves, like ENCYST, and they can become incredibly durable in the environment. So what you want to do is, if you're dealing with that pasty, orangey, yellow diarrhea that you probably know is coccidia, just get rid of it, throw it away, sanitize it as quickly as possible so it can't sit in the environment and become durable. Yeah.
Cool. And then we'll do one more, and I'll put the other questions that we have into the into MPF, and Dr. Aziz will help us answer them after. The one question, the rescue website said it is not intended for laundry. How much do you add for a load?
I will look that part up where you say it's not intended for laundry. It might not be, it could be that it's not labeled for laundry. So I understand that. But typically what we recommend, and this is from the manufacturers of rescue themselves, is 1 ounce of rescue per gallon of washer capacity. So it's not just 1 ounce per whatever washer. Try to look up how big your washer is, and then it's 1 ounce per gallon, if that helps. But I can look into that because maybe it's just not labeled for laundry. I can look into it for you.
Okay, cool. I'll add it as a question for MPF.
Great.
Okay. All right, y'all. Thank you so much, Dr. Aziz. This was amazing.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks to everybody watching today's webcast. The questions we didn't get to, we will be answering on the forum. Dr. Aziz will be available for the next few days on MPF to continue this discussion, and you can post more questions there. And thank you, everyone. We will see you next time.